Hi, I'm Claire Ezekiel from International Languages and Cultures here at UWG. I'm delighted today to bring you a conversation with colleagues Dr. Marie-Cécile Berthaud and Dr. Cassandra Bollard. They are both professors of psychology here at UWG, where Dr. Berthaud specializes in the relationship of language and the self, and also just the psychology of language. Dr. Bollard specializes in the psychology of love, personal relationships, and human growth and development. So, we'll talk today about our fifth film in the 2023 Albertine Cinémathèque French Film Festival. And this film is Leila Bouzide's film Une histoire d'amour et de désir, A Tale of Love and Desire. Please be sure to join us for our next film, our last film in the festival, Mr. Klein, that will be screening on March 15th. And details for that can be found on our festival website. So now please enjoy this faculty Q&A for Une histoire d'amour et de désir. So for our conversation today, I thought a good place to start because our film is a great example of a relationship and a relationship forming. So I thought a great place to start would be with a question about our main character, Ahmed. So Ahmed is a college student. He's studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, but he is of Algerian descent. So even though he's of Algerian descent, he grew up in the suburbs of Paris. His parents left in the 90s because of unrest. And so what we have is Ahmed kind of on this quest for his own identity throughout this developing of a relationship. So I wanted to start with this idea today of how might identity or the quest for one's identity influence a relationship and influence understanding love?
Most definitely. I'll, kind of take it back to just how we come to form our identity, and how we get an internal working model of ourselves. And it's really through attachment. It's through attachment to our, primary caregivers during childhood. And a lot of times that shapes how we see ourselves. And so sometimes, especially when we're thinking about the emerging adulthood period, that Ahmad is in, and you're trying to discover who you are. And so sometimes even through intimate relationships, people are attaching themselves or exploring certain identities there, but then also how that relationship goes also shapes their identity with respect to value, how they feel valued, how they expect others to respond to them in other relationships as well. So and even how you see yourself. It reminds me of self-verification theory. What we know is that how you see yourself as an individual shapes the evidence that you're looking for in relationships. So if you kind of have this positive self-concept, this positive, view about yourself, you're going to be looking for evidence, positive encounters in your relationship. So, I mean, you could probably go on and on in respect to, forging an identity, and then even thinking about how relationships shape your expression of yourself and how they shape your life.
Yes, I really so much agree with you, Cassandra. So in fact, we have to turn the question around, right? So starting with the relationships and how they lead to us developing an identity. And that does in fact never stop, I would say. So there is certainly a very significant moment in adolescence with this quest for oneself, which is also, this quest is also very much culturally shaped. How do we look for ourselves, right? And this happens in different cultures differently, and it's also different for genders. So we see the sister of Ahmed in the film, Delila. She does it differently. She has a very different story going on, which is only touched upon in the fringes. But so it's really this the journey of Ahmed through different relationships and how this helps him to develop an identity that he feels comfortable with, because so this is also what Cassandra said, this kind of how do you say that? Self-view, not comfort.
Self-concept.
Self-concept. And it's also this we come to establish something, we feel, okay, that's my identity. I can live with that, right? And I can live with that with others, with different others. And he is on a journey to that. And this journey is also the journey between the suburbs and Paris, between no traditions and other traditions, or having a tradition discovered with his father, from different concepts of being Arabic, different ideas of what language means to us. I mean, everything is just in the move, right? And there is identity, it's in the move. So, and this is so beautifully done, because we can accompany Ahmed on his trip. And even if we are, adults with, okay, I'm done with my identities, I'm all right, more or less. But no, we again enter this moment of discovery. So that's absolutely beautiful.
Mhm. I agree. I think that those are fantastic points. And I think it's so fantastic as well in the film that, we watch throughout Ahmed's journey, a journey with his father too. We learn information about him, and we see him opening up in a way as well. So we have a very, literal journey and movement happening between, immigrating and moving, and then also Ahmed's journey he's taking into Paris, where he's having this kind of quest sparked from his courses that he's taking. So I think these are great ideas and great points in a really rich discussion of these themes in the film. On this idea of him going to Paris and starting to take courses at the Sorbonne, he's studying literature there, and then that's where he meets Farah, this Tunisian girl that is studying also, and they have classes in common. And so they are taking a class on Arabic literature, and the literature depicts a sensualness and eroticism that is new for him. And so how does this impact this quest of his self-discovery that he has? He's meeting Farah and also experiencing this new type of language in a way.
Yeah, Cassandra, you can start.
Yeah, I think it liberates him. I think it gives him a freedom, through seeing that expression and seeing that full expression of desire and eroticism. I think that kind of helped to liberate to him to incorporate that in his view of himself. A lot throughout the movie, you see he was kind of constricted or restricted in a way. And I think that reading through that literature, it kind of opened his eyes to, wow. And it was part of his culture too. And it seemed to kind of be very different from, some of the cultural norms that were kind of, he was experiencing from his, his family and even friends and things of that nature. So I think it was almost like liberating for him to maybe even incorporate his view of himself as a sexual person.
This is so interesting, this view on erotic literature, because this is also something we Westerners do not really acknowledge as literature. And there is a short moment where they are in the library, Ahmed and Farah, and he says, but that's not literature. And she says, why not? Right? So what's literature? What's accepted? And this translates back into, what do we accept as part of our desire, of our sexual and also love, simply not simply, complicatedly, love in the richest sense and senses. And I think this is goes also against the prejudices of Westerners having the most beautiful literature, and this is taught at the Sorbonne, and there is a whole erotic, beautiful, it's poetic, it's enchanting, And we didn't receive it. We didn't read it. And I don't think we do yet. So we are in the same place. We also discover something, a history of a culture we are used to see more or less through, I mean, since 9/11, we have to struggle with prejudices and Islamophobia and all that. And so this means a whole change. It's for Ahmed, and again, we go with him. Oh, there is this beauty back in the 12th century. This is just amazing. And she says, Farah says, it's so modern. And it is. And so I think our modernity is making a lot of divides between sexuality and easily pornography and true love. And Cassandra, I would like to hear you about that. How is this integrated in your experience? Because I think this is also something we struggle with, not only Ahmed. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it highlights, maybe one of the limitations to, the English language is that the word that we have for love is just singular, is love. And I believe I recall in the film, it said that in Aramaic, it was over 100 words. And so I think that, there are a lot of different constellations of love, a lot of different sides. And Dr. Sternberg has this triangular theory on love where there are 3 sides to a triangle, and there are different combinations that could be experienced. One being intimacy, which is that deep inner knowing, sharing of self, disclosure, all of that, and then commitment, and then passion. And I think, what is the difference between passion and this maybe erotic literature or things of that nature, but it's kind of like that strong sense of a sexual desire with passion, and there are different combinations. So companionate love would be a high degree of commitment in addition to intimacy, but it wouldn't have a lot of passion. We would see that with couples who are maybe been together for 40 years, maybe, the grandparents, who've been together maybe 40, 50 years. And what's really interesting is when we're looking at what gets people together or making commitments, usually it is the desire. I say, I don't frown upon it. I say usually that's the trigger to get the race started, and so there's nothing wrong with that trigger. And it's really interesting. I was just talking about this the other day in class. Like oftentimes the things that initiate people to make those commitments is not the same type of love that sustains it long term. And so usually the passion and the desire that causes people to, decide to be with one another, it initiates I call it the marathon. And but usually what sustains it is a little bit different. It's usually more so that companionship, that deep sense of attachment, to one another. So yes, there are so many different kind of, combinations of these different sides of the triangle. And I think you have to kind of find what works best for you. But I never frown upon it. And even what's so interesting too is that chemically, what is happening is that different parts of our brains are triggered during the attachment phase versus infatuation versus quote unquote, I guess you would say like just that sexual desire, with the release of testosterone and estrogen and things of that nature, when there's this deep degree of sexual desire. But when we're looking at the brain, even when looking at attachment versus infatuation, like different parts of the brain are lit up because there's usually some type of reward element. Like it was like even in the movie with Ahmad and Farah, there was this reward element for them being together. And I think even on her side, closer to the end when she was like, I can't take this anymore, you're not reciprocating, it was costly. you know, and so usually there's kind of like when we're looking at love, even from like a social exchange, you know, perspective, you know, you want there to be this rewarding element. So even, you know, when we're looking at our brains, different parts of our brains are lit up based on the experience that we're having, and they're distinct, even to that degree. But I guess I kind of went a roundabout way of explaining that, but yeah, so interesting stuff. But there is a distinction. There is a distinction, and I think it's all needed. It's all a part of the race.
I also think it's needed, but it's really interesting to me how what culture do with that, right? What they privilege and what they separate and what they allow to integrate and who is allowed to integrate. So
Yes.
if we think about the film, so we have the friends in the suburbs with quite rigid gender roles for reasons that one can explain, but it's I don't want to now, because my point is there is a concept of hyper virility that does not allow for the fragility coming up with a love that would integrate the triangles, all the sides, something like that, right? So and this happens to Delilah, the sister, as she wants the whole triangle.
Yes.
Right? She is regulated. So that's not for her, because otherwise she's a prostitute.
Yes.
Right. So and for men, it's allowed that you have to be discreet. You have to go to Amsterdam, for instance, right? Red Quarter and so on. So this sexualization, so how women are considered, and this is also some, and man, of course, man, sexuality of man, this is very much part of this move, also of this identity journey he is making. And I think the film really wants to invite into exploring sexuality, male sexuality, which is beyond hyper virility, masculinity, and fixed gender roles. Although, you know, Farah and him and Ahmed, they are very, very masculine and very feminine. But with that package, they make it beyond, even beyond the Western world, because they work against our prejudices of Arab is just Islam and convention orthodox, misogynistic, so against women and all that, right? No, it's much more sensual than most of us would have known and know, right? So I like that questioning. The film questions so many, not only Ahmed's idea of who is who and what is what, but also the viewer, I guess. And I would be really curious how people from the suburbs watch that, people from a different age and so on, and all this around sexuality, what we do with sexuality, how functional it became, and how, you know, abusive, so much of around abuse, of sexual abuse. And this is such a different story here, such a different feeling of sexuality.
But it's a beautiful story that's flipped, and we're seeing something opposite of this, you know, hyper masculinity, and this we're seeing the fragility of the male perspective here. And even with the final scene where they finally have where we see Ahmed's first like sexual experience, you know, we see it from the female gaze of him, of his body, how he's experiencing it. So with this idea, how do you think that influences you know, the view of the sexual experience and, you know, the sensualness from different gender perspectives, and based on what we've seen a lot of in film already?
So maybe can I start, Cassandra? Is that okay? Yeah. So it's a difficult question. So let me give you my personal view simply on what I saw. And so the very first picture we get drops and on a glass, and then we find out it's a shower, and then we see the body, and then we see Ahmed's back with the pearls, the drops. And it's very sensual, it's very calm, but it's very evocative. And it takes time, it takes its time, right? The gaze is on the male body, but it's a very tender gaze, you know? It has nothing already sexual, it's just suspended. It can be tender, it can be sexual, it can be just a mother's gaze even. But it's really more a female gaze, seeing that landscape of the shoulders with the wet drops, which is of course an icon of sensuality in movies, I guess. And in his dreams, he has also, we see some of his skin. And at the end also, where the sexual act is more his back, right? His whole body back moving. And so the sensuality presented is very careful and tender, and it's soft as the skins are soft. And it's not this strong and, eruptive kind of sexuality. And so it's very interesting to me what it does in terms of, how do you feel the presence and there's what I call softness of the skin. So I appreciated that a lot. And maybe so I think, yes, I know what I wanted to say. The most powerful and my favorite moment in the film is where you see the ink, black ink, writing a line on his body, right? It's a fantasy he has. It's an erotic fantasy, but it's a fantasy about writing. He wants to be a writer. It's a fantasy about writing unknown letters and all of this, so Arabic letters and this black ink, right? It's fabulous. And everything is in this one picture, it's together. And he is only breathing in a way that we feel, okay, and we feel the sensuality of the moment. So this is what I can say to your question. It's really a complicated question, so I can only answer it from a personal gaze. Yes. I would really love to hear about the place of writing in all of that, the letters, and how you guys feel that, the writing and actual writing, and he touches the letter of her in a specific way, and the dedication,
It was like he found two loves. It was so illuminating. And then to hear the history of his father, and how, his father even helped him to translate the letter. It was I think it was the unfolding of two loves, and strengths as well for him, that he was kind of closed off to in the beginning. And I think his love for writing kind of helped to restore his relationship with his father. It helped to restore, a formative relationship, from his childhood. And then it helped him to forge a relationship, with Farah. So I thought that was very powerful.
Yes, that's true. And it allows also the father to bring back his history, his painful history, but also his beautiful tradition. He has all the books on the shelf. He has them, and he has the knowledge. And this is also so painful for migrants, so for immigrants from a heritage culture where they don't have the writing, especially when you have a different writing system, the writing and the language anymore. It's only in a reduced form in the prayers, for instance, for Muslims. But you don't read Arabic anymore, and you don't, of course, not read literature and all of that, right? So you are cut off. And for Algerians, because of the history, it was particularly strong. This cut off was very strong. And the father buried that. And his son goes back, and they both link back to the tradition, to the language. And you see the father writing. This is really a nice moment, Cassandra. You see his translation, right? His thinking of this is this, and he makes little arrows and so on to explain, to understand the words and how they are composed. Yeah, so you're right. It's another love that comes here, that is discovered through language.
Yeah, and I think, it's a really great example as well of, language being the vehicle to take us along the journey, right? So it's a way that we see Ahmed living in his books at first, living in the world that his books create, kind of, and staying within that kind of inner self. And then through, new language, through new, words on pages and ideas, we see this expansion, and then we follow his own journey through the new, language that he encounters. And I think it's a really beautiful way to bring together different types of journeys and have it represented in one specific way. And kind of touching on this idea of language, I wanted to get into a little bit the idea of like the language of love, right? So that's a phrase that we hear a lot, the language of love, right? And part of Ahmed's journey is finding a way to overcome his own resistance to his emotions, his own resistance and reluctance to what he feels, right? And this idea of giving in to these feelings that are part of a relationship for the first time that he's really understanding. And so how do you see the language of love differ between characters, maybe differ between cultures, because we have characters that represent different cultures? Is there anything, there with that idea of how love is represented?
Yeah, I think early on, it was represented through very gentle physical touch. And, even just in proximity, with him wanting to be close to her at times or put his hand, just very gently on her knee, or even helping her, when she got stuck on the fence. I think that it was a very gentle expression there of physical touch. I think that even words of affirmation, I'm just thinking of kind of, the love languages that, a term coined by Dr. Gary Chapman, the 5 love languages. And understanding how she was trying to bring him out of his shell, that was really an act of service, and she was trying to, help him in a practical way, in that respect. You saw so many, different expressions of it. And I think that's why he was hesitant, because of some of the, cultural norms, that first time at the party, he didn't want anyone to see them kissing, because he was, a little concerned. He was, about how that would be perceived. And so I think you saw a lot of different colors. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I may have service, gifts. Oh, even gifts for Christmas. He gave her a gift that was and even her coming over, that was quality time, And so the 5 love languages are acts of service, words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, and physical touch. So I think we saw all of them in a way, and it kind of, grew.
Yeah, so you got them all, Cassandra. It's really wonderful. I cannot add anything, but maybe I can add another angle, which is the language about love. So how is love talked about? And I found this very interesting, because it's also through the different characters. So you have the black friend, colleague with whom he do the moving, right? And he says something very rude about what the main point is in life is. And then you have the situation, so then you have the poetry, of course, the very mediated form of talking about language, and again, very poetic and platonic. So it's not about bodies and meeting, etc. It's about feelings only. And then this book where he says this is not literature, erotic names and how things are done simply, right? So a kind of procedural advice. So these two kind of books. And then we have the interesting scenes where they go out for through Paris with a friend of Lena, I think Lena. And it's night, and then the two girls, they are behind and discuss the fine forms of medieval times, right? And then there's a guy coming along, and he enters into the play, and he kisses the hands and so on. So this was the language of love in former times, where you had to display all these forms, and this was extremely formalistic, as far as I know. And this is transposed, so from king, from courts in Western Europe mainly. And this is translated into modern times, and the girls laugh and are fine. And he reacts very strongly with his behavior and feelings from the suburbs. So this women should not accept that, or cannot, and the guy can only be harassing them. So they have to be protected, right? And this is his role, to protect. So there is a clear clashing of cultures, how do we do genders, right? So, but it's time, so epochs and cultures, places, suburb, Paris, you have everything there. It's really, and a little bit later, Lena talks about the two men she's sleeping with and compares them and talks about this, and it's very down to earth. It's almost without feelings, and he feels hurt about it. I felt hurt for him as I was watching this, and he clearly wants to talk differently about language. So he searches for, how can I talk about language? How can I talk my language? What kind of language do I want to talk to Farah? And then this comes back to your 5 things, Cassandra, and 5 languages of love. And I think he navigates them all in different paces, but there are some he really doesn't want. So that of the suburbs and the friends, and how this hyper masculinity, neither this loose about only sex, this is not in his thing neither. And I think the film makes a very good job in showing the place of music and dance, and that beyond words, where the touch comes and the gazes. And there, Farah displays her language of love a lot, I find. So how she dances with him, and how she dances in general.
Yeah, and I think that's a great perspective and set of ideas to bring in, and particularly when we're talking about love, but there's also desire happening at the same time. And that's something that for Ahmed, we see him feeling conflicted with, this existence of both in one, and then coming to terms with perhaps feeling both, and then understanding and not resisting one or the other. And we've touched on this a little bit so far in our chat, but can we circle back to this idea of love and desire existing at the same time, and why that could be so hard for him? It's an important theme throughout the film. It's the title, right? And it's specifically broken apart in the title. So it's not just a tale of love. It's a tale of love and desire, right? So why are these things perhaps conflicting when we think of them probably going together?
I think for him is the desire piece that has been kind of forbidden for him culturally. And, and sometimes, a lot of times with love, there is that passion component. And so you could say that desire is embedded into love, but you can experience love without experiencing desire. And so they are distinct, but I think that that is something that is harder to control. And I think that it was almost like the forbidden, and he didn't want to find himself in a place to where he couldn't control himself. And so I think he just kind of pushed away from experiencing it as well. And, love is probably something he's experienced before. I think they were showing that he had an ex-girlfriend who was about to get married or something like that nature. So it sounds like he's had maybe a loving experience, but maybe not maybe an experience that did involve desire. And so I think it was nice that they did separate that in the title, because it was really kind of distinct for him.
Yeah, that's true. I like the control idea you mentioned, Cassandra. I think this is very strong and very important to understand this need for control. And you can control desire, you cannot control, right? And the title at the university, the book's title she's introducing is crazy, becoming crazy because of a person, right? Because of love. So just losing your mind, getting totally out of control. And he certainly never encountered that. And it's a kind of gift that hits you. You cannot do anything, right? And it's what happens. He's on the hallway. She passes the first time. It's already something that flows over. And then they sit in the rows, and she passes again. And this moment of tension, and it's cited again later in the film, where they stand seeing one, she just passes, so nose to nose, right? And there's this tension, and it's just something that hits him, and he doesn't even know her. There's nothing he didn't see her body yet, nothing. It's just this sheer feeling of the presence of the other. Smell whatever you like, right? Of course, the visual. And we are so quick, and it's just in a few seconds we get a grasp of the other. It's not with words. It's just very late. The words are not really important. They become important somehow, right? Yeah. But really, this first little seconds of nonverbal body communication between both, and this is so well grasped. And he wants to stay within control because of his culture, but maybe also because of his father's own story. There is a suppression of emotions, of and I think the film, it's so good that they meet again, right? So and the father becomes the crucial mediator by translating. He opens the door.
Yes.
And right, and he opens also his own door, the father. So getting back out of suppression, and suppression is also oppression. It's racist oppression in France. It was oppression in Algeria during the war, where you had really violent things going on from so-called Islamists, right, against the outraged everybody. It was really extremely torture, violence against villagers and peoples in the city everywhere. So oppression, suppression, you have to leave this history. And so this cultural historical moment, and then he comes to France and he has to suppress his journalist voice. He was a journalist, and he has to do, and he doesn't speak even about it, right? So he suppressed his identity. That's so important, and it's not very much part of the film, but it's a very strong moment of this history of suppression and oppression and suppression, which is passed on the generations, and how the tenderness between father and son help opening this moment and soothe. So I really like that you said a couple of minutes ago, it's another love that is found, right? And yeah, the source of this love, it's so beyond control, it's also beyond oppression, and it's beyond the hyper virility code. You cannot, don't be fragile, never show, and you will just do whatever you want to girls and women, but you will never be yourself fragile or whatever, right? But this desire is just overflowing. It's wonderful. It's wonderful that it happens and that we can see it.
And I think it also, like you said, it helps create this link for Ahmed between, you know, himself and his father, and opens up a new relationship there. And one interesting thing that we see is this film shows us a lot of different types of relationships, I think. So we have, you know, we have the parents and their relationship that is definitely a part two of a relationship that we can imagine they had in Algeria, and then a relationship that has evolved because of their situation in France and what the just reality of that is, and how they both have dealt with situations and the reality of moving and moving their family. And then we see the relationship that Ahmed's sister has, and we have a little bit of a glimpse into what that is. And then Ahmed and Farah, but also with Farah's friend, like you mentioned a minute ago. So we have so many examples of relationships that all differ in a lot of different aspects. So I guess with that, is there anything that struck you as interesting, either one of you guys, about just the representation of relationships in general, not even amorous relationships, just, you know, familial relationships or anything in the film, because we have such a variety that we get to watch play out in real time.
I thought it was interesting in looking at Ahmed and his sister. She said, you know, she was checking on him when he seemed to be down. I thought that was very caring. And she said something else that struck me when she said that, you know, how are you doing, my second dad? Kind of like how, you know, he was worried about her and, you know, kind of telling her what to do, what not to do. But it seemed like it was from a caring place. And it seemed like she was able to recognize that and joke about it as well. It doesn't seem like he was trying to be like just vindictive or mean with that. It seemed like, you know, and with his rationale behind it, it wasn't coming from like maybe she saw it as maybe more so a fatherly voice. And I thought that was interesting when she said that, and she came to check on him.
I was struck by, this is also like a topic that is more touched upon and not developed, but it's really striking for me. So the relationship to his Black friend and colleague. So it's like in jumps across the film. He comes every now and then, this friend, right? And so how is he presented, and then okay, this is not very sexual stuff, it's not interesting. But then later there is a moment where it gets clear that Ahmed is not at the university, and he scolds him. He says, you need to go there, you are supposed to go there, so go there, right? He rushes him back. But before that scene, there is this scene where they meet on New Year's Eve with motorbike, right, with a bike. And where they have an altercation, like a little argument, it's resolved, and then they ride off in the night. But they have an argument, and the black friend says to him, "Sell your soul, your collaborator, your traitor." And it's between joke and seriousness. So there's the whole between them. There's this relationship of, you are one of us, you are not anymore one of us, but go there because you need to go. So out of friendship, do that, you know. And this was short things, but it was really striking to me, because it's the painful moments attached to this, really, because he will lose them. He changes. The cousin or brother says, cousin, I think, who married Malik, he says, "You're changing, and leave my house," even, right? He didn't want that. And so there are some painful moments here with the community of origin, different communities, and I think it's very wise to show them, but not give them the first place. So the first stage, right, the foreground, but it's there, it's lingering, and it's contributing where we started. So how is identity developing through relationships? It's also this, right? So you have to come to an understanding with, where are you moving? What are you leaving behind you? And it's a question for us all, more or less painful, more or less felt maybe, but it's always becoming an adult and getting into new relationships also always means leaving others. And yeah, and I find this so interesting and important and very moving. It's very moving also in all the senses of the word.
You know, it just highlights that love is a journey. And, you know, a journey of discovery. It's a discovery of, you know, what love is like for you, but then I think it's also self-discovery as well. I think in a loving relationship, you are exposed to parts of yourself that you maybe didn't know before. And it's a journey of self-discovery, and then the discovery of, well, what is love for me? And then what is love for me experientially, you know, as well. So I think it was a really interesting film that will cause you to think. Yes, it was a good film.
Indeed, yeah, I agree. Well, thank you both so much for being here with us and sharing your thoughts and your ideas on the film. Again, I can't thank you enough for joining us today for this Q&A. So I'll go ahead and end it here and remind everyone watching the video to please tune in for our films that remain in the festival. And you can find all of our information on our film website for the remaining films coming up in March. So thank you both again so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.